boys and girls. My name is Daphne, and I'm new. Every Wednesday, I've decided to tell you all a little story. Tonight, we're going to talk about George Washington. Does everybody know who George Washington is? Well, he was our very first president, and he did some great things. George Washington was one of our first presidents of the United States. Today, he is on the $1 bill, and he is also on our quarter. And I'm sure all you boys and girls knows what $1.25 is, right? Well, so tonight I'm going to tell you a little story that's called a virtue. A virtue is something about someone or something that is supposed to have represented something great. And George Washington was known for cutting down a cherry tree when he was little. So I'm going to tell you a story. When George Washington was a little boy, he lived on a farm in Virginia. Anybody from Virginia? His father taught him to ride, and he used to take young George about the farm with him so that his son might learn how to take care of the fields and the horses and the cattle when he grew older. Does any of you live on a farm? Mr. Washington had planted an orchard of fine fruit trees. There were apple trees, peach trees, pear trees, plum trees, and cherry trees. Yum! Once a particular fine cherry tree was sent to him from across the ocean. Mr. Washington planted it on the edge of the orchard. He told everyone on the farm to watch it carefully to see that it was not broken or hurt in any way. It grew well, and one spring it was covered with white blossoms. Mr. Washington was pleased to think he would soon have cherries from the little trees. Just about this time, George was given a shiny new hatchet. George took it and went about chopping sticks, hacking into the rails of the fences, and cutting just pretty much whatever he passed by. At last, he came to the edge of the orchard, and thinking of, how his hatchet would cut, he dropped into this little cherry tree. George, you shouldn't do that. The bark was soft, and it was cut so easily that George decided to chop the tree right down, and then went on about playing. That evening, when Mr. Washington came home from inspecting the farm, he sent his horse to the stable and walked down to the orchard to look at the cherry tree, because he was very, very proud. He stood in amazement when he saw how it was cut. Who would have dared to do such a thing? He asked everyone, but no one would tell him anything. Just then, George passed by. George, his father called in an angry voice, do you know who cut down my cherry tree? This was a tough question, and George staggered under it for a moment, but really quickly recovered. I cannot tell a lie, Father, he said. I did it with my hatchet. Mr. Washington looked at George. The boy's face was so white that he looked straight into his father's eyes. "Go into the house, son," said Mr. Washington sternly. George went into the library and he waited on his father. He was very unhappy and very much ashamed. He knew that he had been foolish and thoughtless and that his father was right to be displeased. Soon Mr. Washington came into the room. "Come here, my boy," he said. George went over to his father, Mr. Washington. He looked at him long and steady. "Tell me, son, why did you cut down the tree?" "I was playing, and I did not think," George stammered. "And now the tree will die. We shall never have any cherries from it. But worse than that, you have failed to take care of the little tree when I asked you to." George's head was bent and his cheeks were red from shame. "I'm sorry, Father," he said. Mr. Washington put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Look at me," he said. "I am sorry to have lost my cherry tree, but I am glad that you were brave enough to tell me the truth. I would rather have you truthful and brave than to have a whole orchard full of the finest cherry trees. Never forget that, my son." George Washington never did forget. To the end of his life, he was just as brave and honorable as we was the day he was a little boy. That is such a good story, boys and girls. I want you to think, and I want you to always be honest with everyone, especially your parents. And more than likely, when you tell the truth, you should never be punished for telling the truth. I want you all to have a wonderful evening. And next Wednesday, we will have another story. Night.